Indian Military Review and the Centre for Joint Warfare Studies organised a webinar and virtual expo on digitization and networking in the armed forces on 21 to 24 November 2020. The sessions included communication networks of the Army, Navy and Air Force and interoperability, network-centric warfare and how they are undertaken by each service, C4ISR, including the naval experience, the Army's use of UAVs and beyond visual range operations, decision support systems, particularly communication to weapon systems and identifying friend and foe, information, data and big data challenges including information sharing and managing information overload, space domination and satellites by officers from the Defense Space Agency and DIPAC, and new technologies which included artificial intelligence, 5G and Internet of Things.
Jai Hind, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the fourth and the final session of day one. We have a very eminent panel again. We have General Balbir Singh Sandhu, who is a former Director General Information Systems and Director General the DGST, Supply and Transport, who will be chairing the session. He's, of course, you find him often in the webinars, and he is a regular supporter to Center for Joint Warfare Studies. Thank you very much for spending your time and thank you for coming here. I will, without taking much time, we had some very interesting sessions earlier, and this is the last session of the day. We are already starting about 5 minutes late, so I will not take any time, and I will hand over to the chair to conduct the session. Over to General Balbir, sir.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible to everybody, sir? Okay.
That's fine.
At the outset, let me thank Sanjos, General Bhatia, and General Arora for giving me this opportunity to interact with such young, vibrant minds. And I'm sure I'm going to be a gainer at the end of the session. We are all aware this is a very interesting subject and often probably not given the due importance that it deserves. C4ISR is a very long acronym. It involves organization and technological attributes which enhance command and control. You know, the hub of everything is command and control, and it affects every level. The integration from the strategic national security aspect down to tactical. Like the other day, we got 4 militants. For all you know, the information may have been given at the strategic level. Some other friendly country sharing information with you. Not that I have anything to quote, but the C4, the command and control information system, that's the word I'll use, otherwise too long to say C4ISR every time. The command and control information system has to be integrated vertically. It has to be from strategic down to tactical level at the time faster that you can think of. And within the military domain, whether it is intelligence gaining, whether it is the operations side or it is the logistics, unless you have a versatile, resilient C4ISR system, you're going to be a loser. And you're nobody better than us who are the generalist and non-technical to realize that today's world, which is one word which is common wherever you go, is technology. And we didn't learn it in school and the colleges at the NDA. So we're now finding that it's becoming very, very important to be in the company of the technologists so that you are not left behind in this. The current security environment, I won't say battlefield environment, because security environment persists at all times. It's marked by a hell of a lot of information in terms of quantity, the speed with which it flows, and the ability to interface that with the weapon system, which are very, very destructive. And the interoperability of the digital devices, Imagine there was a time when we didn't know how to get information from the laptop and the mobile. Today, while you're moving around, going for a party, you can access your laptop and continue to take action. So in such an environment, you have to have absolutely modern C4ISR devices should you wish to survive. And in most of the military magazines and even in the normal magazines, you often see comparison of two armies or two alliances or two groups. They talk about the number of soldiers, the number of divisions, formation, the number of tanks, aircraft, ships, etc. But nobody ever compares the effectiveness of the command and control systems of the two armies. And for us, it was highlighted by nothing else than a number of conflicts. You saw the Azerbaijan and Armenia conflict just now. And the ultimate one was the Gulf War I, where the troops were left waiting in the trenches and the systems of the Americans went and paralyzed the entire command and control and the other civil facilities, due to which Iraq had to surrender within no time. So ultimately, these systems have to be very robust, and the wish list is immense. What do I need out of a C4ISR system? I will repeat, at the cost of repeating, we need a system which can survive. Like they say, no war plans have survived the first bullet. Here, you won't get another opportunity to make amends. So your C4ISR system must be so robust that it can sustain, it can withstand, especially the initial conflict. And to be effective, you must have multi-layered, you must have redundancy, you must have technology of a level that can withstand all this. And it must, the key is decision making. It must continue to have information dominance and have a battlefield awareness right up and down and laterally in the chain, so as to give a decision-making advantage. It's not the number of weapons that will matter. It will be the ability to deploy them at the right place, which will matter. And no longer can you have the command and control in a manner where you have the planning stage and the decision-making stage. So instead of a sequential manner, you have to have systems which enable you to have simultaneity of planning as well as the decision making. And needless for me to say, the ISR have to become much more quicker. Gone are the days when you will collect information, process it, and then pass it on to the formations. You are gone. You have to have systems which give you information in the quickest possible time for you to be able to make decisions. And your systems must be, networks must be versatile enough to continue to sustain enemy attacks so that you can continue with the information dominance. The wish list is long, and my little experience has been that before you introduce a new technology, it is outdated. We have a system of RFI, RFP, tendering system, L1. Maybe in the case of technology, we need to have such modification that there's a commitment for continuing to keep you updated with the latest technology, and you are not left redundant, because our systems take our processes and procedures take a few years to procure things. So more on this will be told by the experts out of their experiences and out of their knowledge, because I'll be a very wrong man. I could put forward the wish list as we learn, and it'll be the expert who will tell us about their experiences. And to start with, I'll request Sudeep, Captain Subit Nambiar, who is the commanding officer of the 312 NAS. He is from the Naval Headquarters, who will speak to us on the naval experience in C4I2 and airborne intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. I would request all speakers to take 15 minutes, and so that we have the rest of the thing as question. May I now request Sudeep?
In the next 15 minutes, I'll cover a brief talk on the experiences of the Indian Navy in airborne intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance since its inception, the current platforms, modes of undertaking such missions, and summarize quickly with a brief look into the future of airborne ISR with regard to naval warfare. The scope of the presentation is as flashed on the screen. The objective of ISR is integrated operations and intelligence activity, which synchronizes and integrates the planning and operation of sensors, assets, processing for exploitation, and dissemination for direct support of current and future operations. ISR aims to simply employ suitable assets to undertake reconnaissance and surveillance of areas of interest to generate credible and actionable intelligence for use by the commander. The Indian Navy currently possesses seamless real-time VUHF and satellite-based data link for seamless real-time transfer of data between airborne, surface, and subsurface units. In addition to secure instant messaging and plot transfer, there exists the capability to downlink images, videos, and documents in real time to the units that require the data to take action immediately. There also exists the capability to undertake joint targeting by platforms where one provides the targeting data while the other engages it. At Maritime Operations Center, capability exists to merge data delivered by various assets and wide shipping data to provide a comprehensive single picture of the battle space. Capability to link ISR air operations and missile defense systems at battle management level optimizes naval operations. The Indian Naval Air Arm was formed in year 1953 at INS Garuda, Cochin, with the induction of short Sealand and Fairey Firefly aircraft. This was then supplemented with the Hawker Seahawk and Alizé when the aircraft carrier Vikrant was commissioned. However, these aircraft had limited, if not zero, ability to generate any credible intelligence and were mainly used for fleet support and in an attack role. During the 1971 war, the gambit of maritime reconnaissance and surveillance of the Indian waters was with the Indian Air Force. However, it was decided in 1976 that Indian Navy would take over 5 super constellations from the Indian Air Force. With this aircraft came the entire responsibility of the MR of Indian waters. On 18 November 1976, the first multi-engine long-range MR aircraft squadron consisting of 5 super constellations was commissioned at Goa. The constellation was fitted with a basic maritime radar capable of presenting the surface picture to the operator. However, classification had to be undertaken visually by overflying the contact. This was a time-consuming process and limited the range of the aircraft considerably. It was not until 1978 and 1988, with the induction of IL-38 and Tu-142M, that the Indian Navy attained a capability to monitor wide swaths of ocean regions and track and update the surface picture at regular intervals. Later upgrades of both aircraft saw them fitted with the advanced ELTA ISAR capable radar, the functionality of which we will discuss later. Additionally, fitment of an advanced ESM system and data link ensured their potency in the modern era. With the induction of Dornier 228 short-range maritime reconnaissance aircraft in the early 90s, the Indian Navy got a shot in the arm with respect to its ISR capabilities. Fitted with modern radar and electronic support measures, the aircraft was the first airborne ISR and IW platform in the Indian Navy. The aircraft was capable of tracking multiple targets at a time. In addition to generating credible alien data of the adversary, these capabilities were used to great effect during the Kargil conflict in 1999, where the aircraft monitored the activities of the adversary and helped triangulate military radars for the Army and the Indian Air Force. Upgrades of the aircraft in the early 2000s and fitment of Israeli-built ELTA radar further increased the potency of this platform. In the early 2000s, with the induction of Israeli-built Searcher and Heron UAVs, the Indian Navy attained the capability to monitor areas and downlink data in real time. The aircraft are fitted with advanced maritime search radars capable of SAR and inverse SAR, in addition to the ESM system and advanced optics, which can be used to classify both by day and by night. The aircraft are capable to loiter over an area with endurance of over 15 hours. However, with the requirement to be in VUHF contact with the ground control station, Both aircraft are limited in its range and are mainly used for coastal surveillance and EEZ monitoring only. The Boeing P-8I aircraft was inducted in May 2013 and is currently the most advanced naval ISR platform in service today. The aircraft is a truly long-range maritime patrol aircraft capable of monitoring maritime activity in the Indian Ocean region. Fitted with 2 maritime radars capable of classifying contact at greater ranges, along with AIS correlation, the aircraft can sanitize wide swaths of ocean. The aircraft possesses an EOIR camera capable of imaging targets of interest at far ranges. The ESM system fitted on the aircraft allows an operator to pinpoint a radar emitter in real time and generate a highly accurate position. These cumulative features have seen the aircraft being used for inter-service operations, where it has generated near real-time actionable information for the ground commander. The aircraft also possesses a data link system capable of instant messaging and relaying target plots, which allows it to relay data to the operation center in real time. Now, I will briefly cover the roles undertaken by naval ISR platforms in service today. The primary mission undertaken by the Indian Navy's aircraft is to undertake search and patrol in areas of interest and to generate the surface picture or the maritime domain awareness. In addition, the Navy monitors illegal activities in the Indian Ocean region, such as drug and human trafficking. Data relayed by the aircraft is used by the Operations Center to undertake print analysis and identify potential hotspot areas or lanes which are used for transit. The Navy also tracks multinational forces transiting through the IOR on a regular basis. The data generated by these missions is also collated centrally at the Information Management and Analysis Center, IMAC, at Gurgaon for analysis and may be made available for use by friendly foreign forces if the need may arise. In the past few years, a number of commercial satellites and commercial analytic companies have started contributing to the intelligence inputs. While all inputs may not be necessarily accurate, it remains a credible source for assisting in building of overall picture in the maritime domain. The primary mode of classification of contacts at sea is by inverse synthetic aperture radar or ISR. ISR uses the target motion to obtain a radar generated image of the contact. Using this image, the operator can classify the contact using a multitude of classification options available. A trained operator can classify types and classes of ships at greater ranges, obviating the requirement to visually identify contacts and increasing search areas dramatically by reducing the investigation time. ISAR also enables engagement of contacts at standoff ranges, maintaining out of the engagement range of the enemy ship. Synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, is a tool used by the aircraft to obtain radar-generated images of an area of interest. The radar uses the aircraft motion to increase aperture and generate high-resolution images of an area in all weather conditions, both by day and by night, at standoff ranges. SAR imagery is of great significance in areas out of satellite coverage or where satellite overflight is delayed. SAR imagery can be generated to observe changes in the real time, for example, the presence of warships alongside the harbor or submarines inside the dry dock. Electronic support measures or ESM systems fitted on an aircraft are used to generate electronic intelligence and are capable of detecting radar emissions over a wide frequency band and can cover wide areas other than other platforms. Modern ESM systems allows the operator to classify emissions immediately and to pinpoint the emitter location using a variety of sensor functions. The reduced time required to identify and pinpoint location allows for data to be streamed immediately for use by mission planners. With the use of indigenously built fingerprinting systems, intrapulse analysis can be undertaken to provide highly accurate classification of emitters and build a credible talent library. Aircraft fitted with highly capable optical and infrared cameras are capable of undertaking imagery intelligence missions in areas of interest. This capability is important when the need arises to confirm new weapon and sensor movement on ships or in an area of interest. Imagery intelligence also uses data collection centers to undertake trend analysis over time to determine area developments and likely future plans for development of an area. As in the case of SAR imagery, optical and IR imagery can be undertaken in real time in place where satellite coverage is not available. I will now dwell upon the future of ISR in the Indian Navy and the likely developments in the near future. With the institution of seamless real-time data link network in the Navy, the way ahead is for integration of all service branches in the same network. While the Defense Communication Network does exist for voice and data transfer capability, the network and assets will have to be upgraded to allow for real-time streaming of data from an ISR asset for it to be truly capable. Space-based ISR is currently in its infancy in the Indian military and is poised to grow phenomenally in the next few years. While real-time space-based IMINT and ELINT are already being used by USA and China for updating surface forces, the same is yet to be exploited by India to the same extent. While advanced classification tools are already available for the operator, the way ahead in the realm of computing and data analytics is machine learning. Studies are already underway to develop automatic ISR classification tools based on a pre-fed library. In addition to this, automated ELINT library builder and auto classification of emissions are also under development. Additionally, machine learning can also be used to analyze IMINT out of a large data pool to filter out targets of interest. The future of airborne ISR lies with satellite-controlled UAVs, or RPAs. Satellite-controlled high-altitude, long-endurance HALE RPAs have an endurance of over 30 hours and be controlled from a ground station anywhere in the world. HALE platforms, such as MQ-9B Reaper, are capable of carrying a plethora of guided and unguided weapons and are therefore capable of intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance, or ISTAR in short. In conclusion, I would say satellite-based ISR and automated ISR generation capabilities are the way ahead in this young and vibrant field of maritime domain. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudeep. You really covered it very well as to how the ISR has evolved over the decades post-independence in the Indian Navy. And I'm absolutely happy to hear you covered this. I thought I'll cover it in my final summing up. The tri-service integration. That awareness is a very big change in the Indian Armed Forces that we are getting out of our service silos. And this is something which will probably the era of keeping information under the wraps in bureaucratic silos is gone. And processing open source information, like you said at the setup in Gurgaon, is something which I think we've been found wanting very often, because the whole picture gets built over a period of time. Like they say, intelligence is a continuous process, it's not on and off. So this is another very good thing to hear, because that helps you elaborate certain other information that you get. And so there's been a great enlightening session. May I now request Brigadier Raghav, who's the Brig LRV RPA and operations at the Director General of Artillery, to cover the UAVs for C4 ISR operations. Brigadier Raghav, please.
Battlefield requirements is the driver for emergent technology. The emerging battlefield requirements are a function of the objectives and the means required to achieve the objectives in the contemporary conflicts. The realization of battlefield transparency and situational awareness is contingent on the availability of modern, state-of-the-art communication with adequacy of bandwidth and requisite computation capabilities. Therefore, there is a need for better sensor and communication capability at decisive points. Many technologies in terms of satellite and GPS-based technologies, precision strikes weapons, info technology, and data processing still do not balance the battlefield requirements. Therefore, the visualized C4 ISR systems integrated with UAVs have the potential to leverage a large number of emergent technologies for enhancing combat capabilities of the armed forces and balance the battlefield requirements to a large extent. The main issues in today's communication technologies are flexibility, adaptability, and controllability of bandwidth, frequency, and information and data inflows. This means that network services such as command and control, data management, and data flow controls will be integrated into the systems and concepts of operations of the network-centric environment of the future. Reusing certain communication paths in different ways, such as restrictions on power and operating range, will be the solution to spectrum and bandwidth issues. The rapid improvement achieved in airborne data link rates and processor speeds are the key enablers of future UAV capability. The ideal use of data links today and in near term is to relay all airborne data to ground support services and process it there for decision making. Eventually, onboard processing power and data link capabilities will allow UAVs to relay processed and analyzed airborne data to ground stations for interpretation and decision making in the network-centric warfare. UAVs and ISR is an operational imperative and needs no further emphasis. UAVs for ISR is an evident application. It's a giant and a massive platform with a huge capability for sensor integration. UAV is a highly maneuverable eye in the sky and which rectifies the concept of distance sensing. Platforms which are used by the UAVs in terms of micro, mini, MALE and HALE categories of UAVs, UCAVs and near space RPAs is known. The advanced sensors. The heart of any UAV is the payload that it carries, and wide array of these payloads ranging from optical EW suite to the state-of-art foliage penetration radar provide UAVs a distant edge over the ISR. Principle of employment in a network-centric environment. Primarily, there are four principles: principle of priority, continuity, redundancy, and integration. The principle of priority states that aerial reconnaissance is the prime source of real-time intelligence, which is a prerequisite for the success of any operation. Principle of continuity means that the inputs provided by UAV are continuous in real-time domain for the duration of any hostility. The principle of redundancy encompasses as much of a platform, that is UAV, as it does the non-linear processing and communication networks which are the backbone of C4ISR. The principle of integration implies that the reconnaissance plan with UAVs must be integrated with overall operational plan involving the use of other recce assets, resulting in a coordinated action for systematic and effective employment of ground and aerial means. This extends it to integration for seamless flow of information in a network-centric environment. Multiple role in military for Army. One battlefield will have intense technological environment which requires enmeshing of various technologies, engagement platforms, and delivery mechanisms. UAVs with remote terminals and AMRS provides commanders with an unprecedented capability to control the battle and execute precision strike, direction of own artifire, and strike damage assessments. Electronic surveillance will play a critical role in any future operations, providing electronic orbit of the enemy and utilizing UAVs, EW capabilities, and ESM measures to assist mission aircraft by use of chaff, jamming, and decoys. The role of UAVs in sub-conventional warfare and aid to civil authorities are well known to all. And they are all also listed on the slide. Here I would like to show you a classical video on an execution of a precision strike by UAV utilizing C4ISR network, resulting in conduct of successful operation. Now this shows the integration of the networks and the capability of the UAVs, which carries out such kind of strikes. Coming on to the medium range and wave and short wave infrared, the requirements for capabilities quickly moved from the ability to photograph a military installation to the difficult requirement of to locate individuals or small groups. The exceptional capabilities of shortwave and medium wave infrared technology, with capability to see through darkness, haze, fog, and enhanced ranges up to 150 kilometers, have made them the next generation of imaging technology for ground, airborne, and space sensors. Another revolutionary technology for ISR UAVs is multispectral and hyperspectral imaging. The hyperspectral sensors are well suited for high altitude, long endurance UAVs. Can loiter at high altitudes, allowing these sensors to look down over the target at various angles. The combination provides ability to detect, camouflage, or hidden targets and peek through foliage, thus leaving no blind spots. UAVs have the capability to act as a nerve center by management of sense through multi-sensor data fusion and coordinate with other sea and air-based sensors. The high-end processing and analytical tools available with UAVs results into development of near real-time intelligence. UAVs also have the capacity for data archival, retrieval, and dissemination. Coming on to certain chapters, operability and airspace management. UAVs are in the inventory of all the three, and usage in civil world is on the rise. The employment of UAVs might coincide, though the tasking may differ. Thus, there is definitely a case for joint planning and joint tasking of UAVs of all services to avoid duplicity. A close coordination with stakeholders is also unavoidable for optimal and flawless employment of UAVs. It is a complex and real issue which merits attention. Adequate research and resources need to be allocated by all the three services. The services for amelioration of critical aspects. There is a need to formulate a joint doctrine to find an operationally viable solution. Future trends. I shall quickly touch upon the SWARM. With technological revolution in computing, robotics, and artificial intelligence, multiple disciplines are pursuing ways to transition swarm behavior from the natural environment to artificial. Swarming as both a form of engagement and a capability asset. Swarms can be deployed in mass, thereby enhancing system survivability, adding multiple system redundancies, and presenting a reduced or distributed signature making it ideal resource for urban warfare, CI, and other operations. Manned-unmanned teaming. MUMT operations combine the strengths of both UAVs and manned platforms to increase situational awareness, allowing the armed forces to conduct ISR operations with combat support missions. Giving pilots in rotary and fixed-wing aircraft the ability to control UAVs will be a force multiplier on battlefield. Though the use of sophisticated data links, manned aircraft can take advantage of UAVs' ISR payloads to enhance decision-making and mission effectiveness. The teaming theory also provides a level of safety for the manned platform. Long-endurance near-space UAVs are being developed globally at a rapid pace and prototyped in a 90 days period, owing electric engines and solar-charged high-capacity batteries. Near-space UAVs operate at altitudes above 60,000 feet and can be used as low-cost alternatives to satellites. Weaponization. The UAVs are able to carry a combination of ATGMs, air-to-surface missiles, air-to-air missiles, and laser-guided bombs. This would greatly reduce the loop between surveillance and engagement, since the same platform will execute both the tasks. The armed UAVs will also supplement the anti-tank potential of the ground forces as well as attack captives. The armed UAVs will also find employment in sub-conventional operations on both sides of the line of control. I would like to highlight that the digitization and network-centric services are rapidly being integrated into the systems and concept of operations in C4ISR environment. On board processing power and sometimes the platforms making at all levels in the network-centric warfare. Jai Hind.
Thanks a lot, Brigadier Raghav. That was a very good rundown on the application of UAVs as it exists in the Army. But I have some points probably for our own consideration is the infrastructure that we possess to cover all the areas and with the frequency that we desire. That's one issue probably which requires a lot of attention and effort. I was at one place where I was involved in this. I think the infrastructure probably will need a lot of effort. And the crux lies in execution. Are we able to execute everything in terms of resources, in terms of processing, in terms of real-time delay, and then giving it to the decision-making commander in time? That's something which probably is another thing to look into. But the ultimate utilization of UAVs, there's a video by Shekhar Gupta on the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict. That is a must-see for anybody who's dealing with the UAVs, how Azerbaijan used their kamikaze drones. The innovative use of UAVs has made every other resource, including the tanks, redundant in this conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, which, in fact, they used an old aircraft, I think AN-2 or something, which was utilized as a platform which was unmanned. And as this big thing was seen by the Armenians, they opened up all their weapons radars. And the moment they opened up their radars, that was destructive. That had a destructive armament, or which went and homed onto those and destroyed them. They say that if you see that video, the troops were left just sitting in the trenches and they were decimated right there without any contact by human being. So the use of UAVs, this is a must-see video which will give us the innovative use of UAVs besides the information gaining. And I'm sure, like you showed that video of precision strike on a target, those are the kind of things probably we have to think of on the utilization of UAVs. Thanks a lot for this. And now I will request Group Captain Devashish Kukreti. He is the Group Captain Air Operations Offensive, to give us from ground to sea. Now let's go beyond visual range, think big, and try and see things which we can't see otherwise as army men. Over to Devashish.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Group Captain Devashish Kukreti from Air Headquarters Vayu Bhavan. And the topic given to me today is beyond visual range surveillance. Now, surveillance by definition means keeping a continuous watch, whether over an area of interest or terrain or even an individual, depending on the requirement. Extensive ISR operations are essential, both during war and peace, to ensure that intelligence of the adversary is available that can be gainfully employed when planning and executing a campaign or operations. ISR forms a precursor to all operations and is a continuous process. The intelligence gained of the adversary's deployment, disposition, movement, and force ratio would always maintain a mandatory requirement for operations. Since older times, the military forces have always utilized vantage points located at heights to keep a watch on the adversary, be it from top of the hills or mountains, or even in hot air balloons that were extensively used during the American Civil War by both the sides. With technological advancement, the role of humans for surveillance has been taken over by sophisticated systems that are operated on ground, underwater, in air, and even in space. But today, we shall restrict ourselves to the surveillance systems that are being used for undertaking beyond visual range surveillance. These systems are designed for surveillance at distances much larger than the visual limit of the humans. While a number of systems have been designed as ground-based surveillance systems that are used extensively in tactical domain by the surface forces for keeping a watch on the adversary and his movements. These systems are basic in nature, with low operating cost and limited primarily in range due to the line of sight restrictions. Thereby, areas that lie beyond the line of sight are not covered. To obtain vital information and intelligence about these areas, the ISR systems on board airborne platforms are utilized. These airborne systems include the manned and unmanned aerial systems like the fighter aircraft equipped with podded systems, fixed-wing transport aircraft with integral ISR, hail or mail unmanned aerial systems with multiple payloads, and even tactical and micro UAVs. These airborne systems are limited due to endurance, wherein they cannot remain positioned over the area of interest for extended duration of time and are limited in range due to their navigation and guidance at times. Since the navigation and guidance may be dependent on the line of sight systems. Further, since they operate at altitudes where their operation can be severely affected by inclement weather, and also they remain vulnerable to the enemy air defense systems. ISR by space-based artificial satellites overcomes most of the issues of the range, endurance, and weather. However, the revisit time and availability of higher resolution imagery for vital information remains a challenge. Further, the satellite cannot be maneuvered akin to an aircraft or a UAV to move from one location to other in quick time, as the requirement of ISR may keep changing. Since every deviation from the preset orbit would entail severe fuel penalty and thereby the endurance or the life of the satellite itself. Therefore, persistent surveillance over an area of interest cannot be completely achieved by satellites alone. Altitudes above the surface of Earth are utilized by airborne and space-based ISR systems, which are as depicted. While the mail or hail class of unmanned aerial systems utilizes altitudes up to, say, around 12 kilometers, the satellites utilize the altitudes from low Earth orbits onwards. Recently, a Japanese satellite has been placed in the lowest orbit possible at 167 kilometers, although only for a duration of around 7 days, as it has to continuously burn its fuel to stay in this low orbit. with the ability of maintaining satellites in extremely low Earth orbit and airborne systems, not being able to maintain above a certain limit of the altitude, the space between upper limit of airborne ISR systems and lower limit of the space-based assets has not yet been exploited completely by the ISR systems. Therefore, there is a need for a system that can be effectively utilize this space while remaining at one location for a long period of time with capability of performing functions that are similar to that of the satellites. The system would be able to address the shortcomings posed by both airborne and space-based systems. As being at stratospheric altitudes, this platform would be independent of inclement weather as it would be deployed above the weather. The platform would also have the capability to function both by day and night equally with multiple or customized payloads. The platform would be capable of performing numerous civil as well as military applications. In comparison to manned and unmanned multiple platforms required, this platform will be able to provide cost-effective means of surveillance. Now, this capability has been demonstrated by the HAPS platforms. The HAPS stand for High Altitude Pseudo Satellite Systems. These systems are designed to operate at stratospheric level, working on the solar electric power, thereby negating the requirement of carriage of additional fuel for its flight, which would again add a weight penalty along limiting the endurance. The use of solar charged batteries provide long endurance in days and even months. Since it operates at stratospheric altitudes, it is free from inclement weather as it flies above the weather. High resolution imagery, better than satellites, can be obtained using sensors which are similar to the satellites and are being deployed at much lower altitudes in comparison to the satellites. While the day operations can be looked after by the solar energy, the night operations can be undertaken by using power from the batteries. These platforms can thus perform all the functions similar to the satellites. The benefit being that it can stay within a given location and at the same time can also be maneuvered to be deployed at another as per the requirement, thereby providing both persistent surveillance as well as flexibility in its deployment. These platforms can be airplane-based, airship-based, or balloon-based, while the airplane-based designs can be lightweight with large wingspan. The airship-based HAPS would entail a large-sized airship or a balloon-shaped object filled with helium that would require sizable area for storage as well as for its launch. Similarly, the capability to carry payload would also vary between these systems depending upon the design and utilization envisaged. The endurance of these systems would primarily be a function of the charging-discharging cycle of the batteries and the need for replacement of these batteries. Some of the common specifications of these systems are as shown on the slide. The operating altitude is stated from 14 to 30 kilometers with on-station time ranging up to 90 days for aeroplane-based HAPS and up to 12 months for the airship-based HAPS. Payload carrying capacity also varies from say 75 to 100 kilograms for the aeroplane-based HAPS and up to 500 kilograms for the airship-based HAPS. The higher altitude of operation would also provide up to 600 nautical miles of line of sight, and while being stationed at a location, the payload would also have a capability to look up to 80 kilometers off its northern position. The concept of having an aerial platform that can function as a satellite has been well appreciated by a number of civil and military agencies across the world, as it has both civil as well as military applications. In this regard, a number of agencies world over are developing these systems. Some of these with specifications are as shown. The Zephyr HAPS, developed by Airbus, has recently made a world record of staying in air for more than 25 days. The airplane-based HAPS has a wingspan of around 25 meters and can carry a payload of 5 kg. A number of versions of the Zephyr have been made. This is Zephyr 6, which we are covering. Another HAPS developed by AeroVironment has proposed a number of civil applications that can be provided by the system, including telecom and communication, maritime surveillance, land border monitoring, and other disaster management applications, including industrial and wildfire monitoring. The Odysseus system developed by Aurora Science and Boeing also promises similar features. It has a wingspan of 243 meters with a weight of 1,500 pounds. In the category of airships, the Stratobus HAPS developed by Thales is a large helium-filled balloon carrying a payload of 250 kg. This can be launched from a static location and takes approximately 4 hours for ascent and up to 6 hours for descent for maintenance. The airship has a weight of up to 5 tons and is powered by 4 solar electric propellers that keep it stationary at one location by maintaining against wind speeds up to 90 kmph. The stationary location of the Stratobus would be very useful for applications of persistent surveillance and monitoring of a particular area. Further, to maximize harnessing the sun's energy, the airship rotates on its axis so as to align with the movement of the sun in the sky. The airship HAPS can remain at its altitude for 1 year, after which it is to be brought down for maintenance, and the task can be looked after by launching another Stratobus. Some other platforms that are under development are Aquila by Facebook, Hawk 30 by SoftBank, Pathfinder and Helios by NASA, and Phantom Eye by Boeing. The HAPS system promises a high-resolution submetric imagery of 15 centimeters and the image size covering 10 by 10 square kilometers, along with continuous and persistent surveillance. Autonomous mode of operation, low cost, disruptive as well as complementary applications, repositionable capability, which would be better than satellites, maritime surveillance, disaster management, and providing communication and internet services in inhospitable terrain. The advantages of HAPS system for use in the ISR would be beneficial in terms of deployment during no war, no peace scenario to provide continuous and persistent surveillance over area of interest, covering the gaps that are not covered by airborne as well as satellite surveillance. The intersection by AD weapons is also limited due to the altitude of operation. The use of HAPS for continuous surveillance would free other RPA-based or aircraft-based recce platforms, as number of sorties required would also reduce, thereby reducing the overall cost of operation. Some challenges that remain for the HAPS system would include the weather limitation during launch, recovery, and climb to the altitude. Procedures would need to be defined for non-interference with other aerial traffic during transition. Time required to reach area and altitude operation would entail prior planning for launch. Our requirement issues for data transmission and its effect on the endurance, data handling capacity of the link needs to be factored in the overall plan. Also, the requirement of having encrypted or jam-proof uplink and downlink cannot be understated as far as the military operations are concerned. HAPS is a promising technology for future ISR missions. However, to ensure that it is cost-effective for us, the technology needs to be indigenously developed. This would be a challenge, especially in terms of developing technology for lightweight, long-life batteries, along with the solar technology, which would be efficient, that can keep the platform airborne for as long as we need. The funding for the design and development can be shared between the civil as well as military agencies, as the system has equally beneficial application for both. Numerous civil applications can also be provided along with military applications, especially in areas which do not have proper infrastructure, like the northern part of the country as well as the northeast part of the country. With numerous civil as well as military application of HAPS in Indian scenario, the technology has a promising future. The deployment of HAPS for persistent aerial surveillance, thereby covering the gaps in satellite coverage and aerial ISR platforms, would prove to be extremely beneficial for providing capability of unrestricted surveillance. The HAPS platforms, while maintaining on own side of the border, would still be able to provide surveillance in areas well inside the adversary's territory due to its height of deployment. The capability of operating independent of inclement weather is another feature that would be rewarding. The responsibility of maintaining vigil over vast land as well as maritime borders would become cost effective by employment of these platforms. Complementary applications of acting as a relay for communication or for providing internet services at places which do not have this facility will strengthen the communication network in far-flung and remote locations, especially along the volatile borders. To conclude, the HAPS technology is promising, cost-effective, and can provide persistent surveillance over a desired area of operation, having both civil as well as military applications. I now conclude this presentation with the information that the first stratospheric flight was undertaken in 1931 in an airship with a gondola which was pressurized. And in the present times, we are again doing the same. So is it back to future? Thank you.
You rightly brought out the limitations of certain platforms, because we often expect, say, a satellite to give us everything at all the time. It doesn't happen that way. If India could have its nuclear tests without the American satellites detecting us, that itself highlights, and the revisit capability and then the time over the target or the likely area of interest. These are the limitations probably which need to be complemented by alternate sources. So that's something which you really covered well. And it was very nice to learn about the lower end of the space versus the upper end of the atmosphere using airborne systems vis-a-vis satellites. And the HAPS is a new thing, and like you said, it is the old thing repacked for a new. But whatever, the thing is, any amount of innovation in information gathering and surveillance is less, because the key to success in future battlefield, which will be very, very short, where you got to be already knowing what you want to do and do it precisely, and then come back clean to say, okay, no more war, is something of immense importance. And that's why more and more investment is likely to go into surveillance and information gathering than only the combat weapons. So with that, is Karishma Mukhi available, sir?
No, sir. No news about her.
Okay. I think then, so it's been a very enlightening session with all three services giving their perspective. And one thing which has emerged, which I said right after the first speaker, and the need of the day, of the hour, of the future is integration. And those of us who feel we have integrated enough, I think we'll be always not so accurate. Because any amount of effort on integration is less, because within the services I've seen between the formations at various levels, because I know whenever you're in a battalion, you always feel the brigade headquarters are the people who don't communicate. And likewise, when you're in the brigade headquarters in the staff, you see the most useless people are in the div and the corps headquarters who don't communicate and who are unreasonable. So to say that we are integrated will be not a very, very accurate statement. And to say that there is a limit, when can you call yourself integrated? Again, I feel in any sport, in anywhere, whoever thinks he knows it all and he's done it all is likely that's the start of his decline. So one thing that I would say is integration of all resources between the three services and between the strategic level resources vis-a-vis the operational and the tactical level. Because I recollect during the 99 Kargil war, we were doing the high command course and we visited the DIPAC, and they said they had clear pictures of the reverse side of the hills and giving detailed information about deployment of these Pakistanis, but how far was it used, how far was it believed and benefited out of at the tactical level is something which probably we need to work on. And another thing which really needs immediate attention is timely sharing of the information. There is nothing which can compensate for delay in decision making. Like I said, today the warfare is too fast. even the security situation, leave the warfare, even during peace, actually the whole nation, whether it is Corona or whether it is insurgency operations, everybody is in a state of managing conflict. Timely information can do damage prevention, and if you are an offensive in nature, probably with much less resources, you can get much more. And the era of holding back information and probably first pleasing and this has been often spoken of in various forums regarding the interagencies. So likewise, I think this culture is changing. I'm very sure it has to be that we need to understand who needs this information the most. It must go the fastest to that person, and then probably your boss and your own hierarchy of processing. That's something which can act as a force multiplier. Maybe time has come that we utilize the industry and other resources to go into C4ISR war games exclusively. Because I remember in the last time when I was in service, we started this concept of separate logistic war game. Because normally during the operational war game at the formation level, logistics is covered between 1 and 1:30 just before lunch. Beer is waiting. And so the commanders, the formation commander, the army commander felt that we should have dedicated 2 days or 3 days after the war game or before the war game, rather before the war game, where we see the logistic angle. I feel it's too scary to think that you will be absolutely having your command and control system functional during conflict. Maybe there is a need to use some youngsters from the universities, from other sources to build C4ISR war games, and any technology. It's an age-old tradition that most technologies are dual use. It is the army which gave the technology to the industry. And now, with fast-moving developments in the industry, maybe the industry can create such thing. Because I used to say when in service that it takes no effort to train a driver on have some entertainment system in your recreation room. So likewise, maybe we have to create such war games which are dual use, which are for the civil, which can get innovative ideas to have our future secured. And needless to say, you have to have robust system. The system which can withstand, and this also flows out from the other point that I just spoke, and Atmanirbhar Bharat has been taught during a crisis of Corona. But out of all the weapon systems, out of all the equipment that the army holds, one thing which is extremely sensitive to off-the-shelf equipment or imported equipment is the C4ISR system or the command and control system, which also, like I said earlier, are the hub of the entire warfare. Probably there's a crying need to indigenize all our systems, which form part of our command and control. And like I said earlier, there is no better way to think of innovation in technology than the recent conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, how they use the surveillance capability as a destructive element to win a war hands down. I'm told a few years back, Azerbaijan was overpowered by Armenia. Azerbaijan now won this conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh in a decisive manner, utilizing technology, innovating the existing technology, and also to an extent acting smart by utilizing the technology which was American of nature but available through one of their allies. So I would say innovative use of technology, continuous upgradation, procedures to make your technology not time redundant. It should be futuristic. It should have the ability to update itself and not get caught up in procurement processes because of the systems that we have. And I'm very sure we have the ability within. Like I used to always say, You can't say that the government has to clear it because the government sits in Delhi. We can very well change our procedures as long as we bring in transparency in them. I don't think there's ever any fear of compromising your operational and other capabilities for the need to follow certain procedure. The procedures can be made in a manner so that the technology is used totally to benefit our own effectiveness. And let me tell you one thing today, at the end of the session, it was a very, very good opportunity for me to refresh my thought process on this. But I think the command and control systems, the C4ISR, the command and control system enabled by the sensors and the reconnaissance and surveillance capability probably are the most important element of combat power in the TPA or in the operational domain. So with that, I thank all the participants for having participated and thank all the panelists for having enlightened us. It's been very enjoyable and very learning experience for me. And may the armed forces continue to innovate, adopt technology, and win wars. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, General Balbir. Thank you so much for conducting this session so very well. This is the last session, and I know the circuit, seminar circuit, the last session, generally known as death sessions, and you kept us awake, and the speakers kept us awake. Though we are virtually awake, but we kept us awake and attentive. More important, it's not awake, it's attentive, and we gained, gleaned, and have been educated on the C4ISR systems. Every time I go back from the webinars, I feel a reassurance that we in the armed forces, we in the military are in the right track. We have all the systems together. We have the industry, we have the scientific community, we have the armed forces, and we can pull us through. And this is what actually is getting the nation facing many challenges, security challenges, up to it. I know we exceed the time about 15 minutes, so I only have to say my thank yous. Thank you, General Balbir. Thank you very much. My thanks to the speakers, Brigadier Raghav, Group Captain Devesh, and Sudeep. Thank you very much indeed. It's an educative session.